What's going on, everybody? It's Charles. In this video, we are going to be installing an upgraded rear sway bar and sway bar end links on the Golf R. After installing the rear sway bar on the R32, a rear sway bar upgrade has become one of my favorite suspension modifications. They don't really impact the daily driving of the car, but in high performance and spirited driving situations, they make a huge difference on the behavior of the vehicle. Now, rear-wheel drive cars are a little bit different, and we'll be going into more detail on that when we do one on the Miata, because we'll actually be upgrading the front sway bar, not the rear. So what's the big deal about the sway bar? Anyway, it's actually the connection between the wheels to stiffen that up. Really, a better name for this part is anti-sway bar, because we are trying to reduce the amount of sway between the two wheels. What that leads to is actually a reduction in understeer. Front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive cars are built and designed with more understeer, which means you need to turn the wheel more to get the desired result of the car turning. When we upgrade that rear sway bar, we reduce the amount of understeer, and it'll actually help the car rotate quite a bit better. This was a dramatic improvement on the R32. I'm hoping for the same kind of thing on the Golf R. When it comes to what we need for this job, it's pretty straightforward with basic hand tools. Here we have our sway bar. These are the end links we're going to install. If you're installing these end links, you are going to need a couple of different tools, but again, it's all pretty basic hand tools. We're gonna need a 16mm wrench, a 15mm wrench, 13mm wrench, a torque wrench, a number 6 triple square, and a number 10 triple square. Now I have 3 different ones here. We're gonna test all 3 of them and see which one fits the best. On the Golf R, because it's all-wheel drive, we have to clear the rear axles. We're also gonna need a 13mm socket, probably deep well is gonna be best, and an 8mm Allen, and of course our paint marker to mark everything when we're done. So these are the end link upgrades that we're going to be using. The main reason I'm upgrading the end links for the rear sway bar is because the factory ones are, you guessed it, plastic. Now, I have heard of some having issues with the plastic ones and that plastic actually breaking. I haven't seen that myself, but of course that is a concern. Plastic sway bar end links are not new to VWs. The Mark IVs had them in the front. Talking to 034 Motorsports, the best way to keep these clean is to just simply spray them with some brake cleaner to clean out any dirt or grime from time to time. This is the side that mounts to the control arm, and this is the side that mounts to the sway bar. If you don't want to mess around with any extra maintenance, they do have adjustable ones that you can look at, or there are some that are just solid metal that replace the composite piece and still have the ball joint on them, so you don't have to worry about any further maintenance. But if you get these, keep in mind that piece is open right there, and you are going to have to do a little bit of extra maintenance. We also have some new hardware. The majority of the hardware on this job is one-time use only, so we have some bolts, a couple of extra nuts that we're going to need to be replacing with it. Finally, I'm going to be dropping the exhaust. That's going to allow our factory sway bar to clear a little bit easier. For that reason, I have my exhaust hanger removal tool. I also like to spray those hangers with some WD-40 to make it a little easier to remove and reinstall. This is actually the WD-40 with the Easy Reach, which has got this cool bendable straw that you can get to those hard to reach places. It's also fun for some trick shotting of WD-40. As you guys probably know, WD-40 has been a great supporter of the channel over the years, so thank you to WD-40 for that and for partnering with me on this video. Of course, first thing you're gonna do is need to get the vehicle up in the air. You can actually get away with probably just lifting the rear of the car if you don't wanna put it up on 4 jack stands. What we're gonna be looking for is the rear end links on the driver's side and the rear end links on the passenger side. Then of course we have the sway bar connecting the two. We have our mount on the driver's side and our mount over on the passenger side. Now, you can do this job without dropping the exhaust. There is enough room to clear as long as you can get the car high enough, but rather than fighting our way around it, I'm gonna just go ahead and lower the exhaust. Let's go ahead and start by removing our end links. We have this 13mm nut that we're gonna have to remove. This is a through bolt, so you're gonna need to hold it on the back side. So we'll go ahead and remove that. Now there's going to be some tension on this end link, which is why I didn't take this nut all the way off. Next, we'll remove the nut that attaches the end link to the sway bar. Sometimes you can just take something like a ratcheting wrench and loosen this nut and it'll come right off. Other times you'll have to counter hold the ball joint and then loosen the nut that way. First, I always try and just loosen the nut. It loosened a little bit, but as you can see, the entire assembly's rotating. What that means is we're gonna have to counter hold it. This is where you're gonna need your number 6 triple square. That goes right in the center of the joint. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna counter hold that and loosen our joint. Once we have that nut removed, we can actually push down on the sway bar a little bit and slide the end link right out. Now our end link's loose, we can take this nut off the rest of the way, slide our bolt out from the back, and remove our end link. So here you can see the plastic end link with the rubber bushing compared to the aluminum end link with the spherical bearing. Of course, we'll do the exact same thing on the other side. Let's see if we can remove this nut from the end link without our counter hold. Looks like we are in fact going to have to counter hold it. Now, if you're struggling to get the end link out of the sway bar or out of this lower arm, a couple of things we can do. We can pry down on the sway bar itself, and that should even this out, and you can slide it right out, sort of like the other side. If that doesn't work, take the nut, spin it on the bolt just a little bit. I like to use a soft hammer here and just tap it out. If you use a soft hammer, you may not have to thread the nut on. We don't want to mushroom up this bolt and end up not being able to get it out. Real quick, a word of caution. If you look right here on this control arm, there is a sensor. This is a ride height sensor. You can see it's a ball and cup, and there's the sensor right there at the top. If you end up prying down on this while the suspension is at full droop, yeah, you run the risk of either breaking the arm or breaking the sensor. Best case scenario is the ball will pop out of the cup, and if you break it and don't fix it, we can have all kinds of issues with lighting, with dynamic chassis, and some other stuff. So be super careful with this piece. If you're struggling to get the bolt out, you can always put your ratchet on the back side and loosen the bolt out, and that should spin it the rest of the way out. You can also put a power tool on it and just zip it out that way. Also, if you're low enough to the ground, you can put a floor jack up underneath here, just push up just a little bit, and that'll relieve the tension here, and you could probably pull the bolt straight out. Now we can go ahead and wiggle our end link out. I like to put the nut back on it so we can save it. Next up, I'm gonna drop down the exhaust system. Like I mentioned before, this is not 100% mandatory, but I think it's gonna make your life a bit easier when getting this sway bar out. Also, if you're doing this on an all-track, I think the repair manual does actually call for lowering the exhaust enough to get the sway bar out. A couple of things before we lower this exhaust. This exhaust has electronic flaps inside of it, which means we have a connector on the left side and on the right side. Those are going to need to be disconnected before we lower our exhaust down. And those connectors are a little tricky, so you might need a mirror or something like that to see what you're doing. Let's go ahead and hit those exhaust hangers with our WD-40. This is where having our easy reach flexible straw comes in handy, so we don't have to just douse the entire rear of the vehicle. If you're worried about this getting on the floor, go ahead and throw some cardboard underneath where you're spraying, and that will take care of it. Next, we'll use our exhaust hanger tool and just push the exhaust out. All right, so a bit of a game time decision. I actually went ahead and removed the entire rear exhaust system. This will make it a little easier for me to film and show you guys exactly what I'm doing. You don't need to do this. You don't need to remove it all the way. Even if you just wanted to lower it a little bit and let it hang down, that should be more than enough room to get your sway bar out and around it. But rather than having it hang like right here in my camera face, I went ahead and removed it. Next, we need to remove our brackets that hold our sway bar to our rear subframe. This is where we're going to need our triple squares. Normally I like these little stubby guys right here. Let's go ahead and start with the bottom one. Now when it comes to our top bolts, we're gonna run into an issue. You can see here our drive axle is basically blocking access to this bolt. So what can we do? Well, initially I thought we'd be able to use something like this that's quite a bit longer to get access to it. Unfortunately, I feel like the angle we're gonna have to go at it, it's gonna be so extreme that we risk damaging the bolt. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a block of wood and our floor jack, and we're just gonna lift this corner of the suspension up. We're only gonna do it as high as we need to in order to get access to the bolt. Now we can take our long reach triple square and get right on it. This may present a similar challenge going back together. So we're loose on this side, let's do the same thing on the other side. Now for the driver's side, it actually looks like we have enough room to get right onto this bolt. Let's find out. And to do it in a way where we won't tear up the axle or risk stripping the bolt out. So there we go, we can loosen that one. The bottom one is super easy, barely an inconvenience. Just watch out for this sensor right here. Now, if you left your exhaust in, you're gonna have to lower the driver's side and then swing the passenger side out. All right, so here is our new sway bar going in. Here's the one coming out. Let's go ahead and measure these and see what the size difference is. Go ahead and zero out our caliper. The original bar comes in at 22.7 millimeters. The upgraded bar comes in at 25.95, probably call that 26 millimeters. Quite a bit of an upgrade from the original one. Now we do need to transfer over our mounting brackets to the new one. I'm gonna keep them on the same side they came off of. Ugh. Never had those give me such a hard time. Make sure you don't have any debris or anything inside of here. And we'll go ahead and swap the other side as well. That one came off much easier. Before we put our brackets all the way on, you want to clean them out, any old bushing material or anything out of them if you can. We also want to make sure that our bushings are kind of in the right spot. This is actually not the right spot. This should be up over on this side, and our other one is pretty close. It should be a little bit more towards the end. We can fine tune this as needed. So let's go ahead and just take our brackets. Now they came off that other one pretty tough, so we're just gonna kind of set them on there in case we need to slide that bushing and bracket assembly over at all. So we'll do the same thing for the other side. Then when we put it on the car, we'll walk this piece in a little at a time so that we don't damage our new bushing. Let's go ahead and start by getting our sway bar up and kind of in position. Getting it loosely set in place, we'll make sure that we get our bushings in the exact right spot. Go ahead and set our bracket as far on as we can. Get our bolt started. Now we can leave it just hanging like this while we set the other side. Go ahead and get everything started as best we can. Now what I want to do is I want to start the end links to make sure that we don't need to shift our sway bar back to the left or to the right. Once that's done, we'll come back and snug everything down and get it all torqued. Our strategy for this is actually going to be pretty simple. We're going to install everything loose, snug it down a little bit, and then we'll lower the car and do our final torquing. So we'll take our new bolt, we'll take our end link, we'll drop the end link down. You can see the hole lined up there. Our bolt comes in from the front of the vehicle all the way through. We'll go ahead and put a new nut on there just to start it. Now the order of the top part is pretty simple too. We take our bolt, we go from the inside of the vehicle out with our bolt, we take our sleeve, we put it over the bolt and through the bearing. Then what we do is we put that into the sway bar. This is where you might need to move this bearing around a little bit in order to get it lined up. So there we go, we're through, we're all the way through. Let's go ahead and just put the nut on just to start it so it doesn't come out. Next, we need to finish handling our bracket that attaches the sway bar to the subframe over our new bushings. A lot of times you can push this on by hand. If you're struggling with it to get it on far enough by hand to thread that top bolt on, take the handle end of a hammer and just push it on. Then we'll go ahead and thread our new bolt in the top, and we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. We'll go ahead and do the same thing with our clamp here. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to slowly walk all of our hardware into a snug state. We'll start with our bolts that hold the bracket to the subframe for the sway bar. We're going to turn them in a little bit on the bottom, and then a little bit on the top, and just go back and forth until it's snug. For the bolt that goes through the top end of the end link through the sway bar, we'll take our 15 millimeter wrench and our 8 millimeter Allen, and we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Now this is not super tight, it's just sort of snug. We'll torque it when we get the car on the ground. Same thing for this bolt down here. And of course we need to do the exact same thing for the other side. Now before we lower the car down, I need to put the exhaust back on. If you didn't remove the exhaust, don't worry about that. We do want to make sure that we don't have any clearance issues, that we don't have the sway bar slid all the way to one side or the other, and we want to make sure that we don't run into any issues with fitment. Now, if you took the exhaust down, lowered it, removed it, whatever you did, it's time to get that put back on. Then what we're going to do is we're going to load the suspension up so that we can get all these bolts torqued down properly. Now that we have our suspension all loaded up, let's go ahead and get these brackets that hold the sway bar to the entire subframe torqued down. Torque these to 20 Newton meters. We'll do the bottom at 20 Newton meters, then the top at 20 Newton meters, Then we need to do another 90 degrees or quarter of a turn. And of course, we'll need to go ahead and do that same thing for the other side. For our final top bolt that attaches the end link to the sway bar itself, this one's a little bit tricky to torque. There's not a ton of room. Had we left the exhaust off, probably would have had a little bit easier time. The torque spec for this is 45 Newton meters. The best way I've found to achieve that is to get the bolt as snug as you can. Then all you'll have to do is that final little snug with the torque wrench until it clicks. We also need to torque the bottom bolt for the end link that goes through the lower control arm. If you are installing the factory end links, you are going to torque this to 20 Newton meters plus 180 degrees or a half a turn. For the upgraded end links, you'll want to tighten them to 35 Newton meters, and remember you should be using new hardware. Also, you'll want to make sure that you do counterhold the bolt on the front side of that control arm. And of course, we'll go ahead and put our paint mark on. Now you may be saying, Charles, I'm working on jack stands. How the heck am I going to get the suspension loaded in order to properly torque these bolts? My favorite way is actually just lowering the car down on ramps, or if you can, driving them up on ramps and doing it that way. But let's say you're just working on jack stands. What you can do with your car on jack stands is take your floor jack and either a block of wood or a rubber pad like this, slide your floor jack right underneath the control arm, and very gently and carefully lift up on it to gain access to the bolts or to properly torque the suspension. You want to take extreme care not to lift the car up off the jack stand. Only lift it enough to compress the suspension. If you lift it up too high, you may create an unstable situation on the car and something you frankly don't want to be underneath. In fact, the factory repair manual tells you to ratchet strap the car to the lift to prevent the car raising up off the lift pad. This won't work at all with jack stands because you just end up lifting the jack stand, but that is a level of safety you need to bear in mind. I just can't stress enough, you need to be extra careful when doing this. All right, so our new sway bar is in, everything is torqued down, everybody's happy, exhaust is back on, wheels are back on. Time to take it for a test drive and see how this bad boy performs. So let's go on and do it. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning, this has become one of my favorite suspension mods because of its ability to change the way the car behaves in situations where you want it to change the way the car behaves. Normal driving, cruising around, it makes no impact on the car. Already, just in that one little turn, I can tell you I can feel the rear of the car considerably stiffer than it was before. Now, I won't be able to fully appreciate how awesome this new sway bar is until we get it in a real true high performance driving situation like at the track or like in an autocross. Even taking it to the mountains should prove to be a very different drive. Even in this little windy road that I'm on right now, it's a pretty drastic difference to how the car behaves. I just went ahead and put it in race mode so that we can firm up the suspension a little bit. Let's see how she behaves now. Traction control! It's so subtle, just you don't even notice it on a straight drive. But once you start to turn the car, the ability for the car to rotate easier is incredible. Like, it's mind-boggling that one simple little modification actually has such a big difference in the way the car behaves. All right, so I'm gonna cruise around a little bit more and enjoy this new sway bar. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Big ups to WD-40 for sponsoring this video. They're also gonna be awesome partners on the Miata project, so stay tuned for that. So with that, I'm out. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you guys again next time. Bwah, bwah, bwah.